Good afternoon, everyone. Today is going to be the history of tobacco part 5. But before we get started, favorite Savinelli 310. In it I got some Peter Stokkebye's Luxury Navy Flake, and my drink pairing, as usual, a glass of sweet tea. I hope everybody's been enjoying their weekend. I know this is the first break in a few days we've had from the rain. Still a little breezy, as y'all can probably hear, and a bit cloudy, but hopefully we can make it through this thing without getting rained on. Anyway, in today's video I'd like to focus on Sir John Hawkins. And what makes him a significant player in this series is he is the one that brought tobacco, or is at least credited with bringing tobacco back to England. And that happened in either 1564 or 1565. But anyway, he was born 1532 in Plymouth, England. And he'd go on to do a lot of things throughout his life. I mean, he was a man of many hats, I guess would be the saying. But he's better known by his title, Sir John Hawkins, and sometimes as Admiral Sir John Hawkins. Most of y'all know he was an English naval commander. He was a merchant, a navigator, a shipbuilder, privateer. I mean, this guy did it all. And we'll get more into that later. But, you know, what really made him famous is that he was the first Englishman to really break into and profit from the triangular trade that was going on during the 16th century and later, all the way up to the colonial years of the Americas, and it was real big during this time. Tell you what, these bugs just love to get after me while I'm in the middle of these videos. I imagine they have a little meeting where they plot against me, you know, whenever they see me getting ready to come out here. See how they can, you know, get at me that day. But anyway, that's what how he gained his fame. Now, not a whole lot is known about his early life. You know, most people don't believe he actually had a proper education until he was after 20 years old. And we do know whenever he was a younger man, he was arrested for killing a man in a tavern fight. But he later received a royal pardon, as it was determined to be self-defense. But other than that, I mean, we really don't know a whole lot. It is believed that he did some work with some Spanish ambassadors, and specifically the ones that negotiated the marriage between Mary I of England and Philip II of Spain. So they figure this is why he was, you know, fairly well known with the Spanish before he actually became a trader and a ship captain and everything else. But how he got into that, sailing and everything like that, is, you know, kind of difficult to determine. I've found several different stories, each one of them contradictory. But without going into a whole lot of that, there was a lot of different things and circumstances that happened with the family that he had married into. And you get all the way down to a man either being hanged or drawn and quartered. And, yeah. That's how he ended up getting involved in the sailing, is he just kind of fell into it. But anyway, let's switch the notes here. Hopefully the wind don't try and blow them all away. But anyway, that's how he got into sailing. But in 1562, Hawkins formed a syndicate of wealthy merchants, and he needed them so they would invest in him so he could get funding for this voyage. But anyway, he did manage to secure the funding, and in 1562 he set sail with 3 ships for the Caribbean. Along the way, he ended up hijacking a Portuguese slave ship, and him and his men ended up capturing 301 slaves, which they turned around and traded off in Santo Domingo. Now, needless to say, this kind of irritated the Spanish and the Portuguese for, you know, to have an English ship raiding their merchant ships. And anyway, it kind of caused a bit of a thing, and the Spanish authorities ended up sinking 2 out of his 3 ships. But all in all, the voyage ended up being a success, because even though they, sank 2 of his ships, and he returned to England with enough money to repay the investors and have quite a profit on top of that. But it was because of his voyage. The Spanish ended up banning all English ships from trading in the colonies in the West Indies. He returned to England in 1563. Excuse me. Now, in 1564, Queen Elizabeth I decided she was going to invest in him by leasing him the Jesus of Lubbock, which is this giant ship here. I want to say they said the thing weighed like 700 tons, so it was a pretty good sized ship for its day. But anyway, he set sail along with 3 other smaller ships to the African coast. And, he was doing his thing, privateering and, seizing prize and cargo and treasure all along the way. Anyway, his journey ended up taking him from up here in England and Europe down to the coast of Africa, over to the Americas, and eventually back home to England. But it was on the second voyage, whenever he was in the Americas, that it's recorded that he actually picked up and brought back the tobacco, and where him and his men observed it being used, and they decided they got to try it. Oh, almost lost my tamper. Bad about that. But I did find a journal entry of his, and of course it was written in Old English, or older English. Excuse me, you gotta remember this was the 16th century, so I did my best to kind of put it in the modern English, so forgive it here. So forgive me if there's anything kind of funky about it, or if it kind of sounds a little funky. But like I said, I tried to put it in modern English, that way I wouldn't have to go through the trouble of reading it in the old 16th century English. But this was written down July 20th, 1565, and he wrote, the Floridians have a kind of dried herb, which with a cane and an earthen cup at the end of it, with fire and dried herbs put together, do smoke through the cane, and the smoke comes through thereof. So there he's discussing tobacco being smoked through a pipe. So, and I guess he was in Florida, whenever he witnessed this, and they ended up bringing the practice and the tobacco and the practice of smoking through a pipe back to England. Now, there's a little bit of debate about that from people who are a lot smarter and make a whole lot more money than me, about whether or not he was actually the first one to bring it back, or if he was the first one just to be recognized for it. Some folks believe that there might have been, tobacco use amongst the sailors in England decades, or at least one decade before Hawkins brought tobacco back to England. But nobody is really sure. I found an excerpt from an old book that pretty much stated that tobacco could have been in use for at least a decade before officialdom, took notice of anybody using it. Which, I guess that would kind of be a hard thing to miss. But then again, in those days, society was pretty segregated. Your working class people were segregated from, the richer class, and, the sailors might have been segregated from, other parts of society, and it might have just been a small community thing. We ain't going to go down there and talk to the sailors. The sailors don't come out and talk to us, so we didn't know. But, that's a topic for a different video altogether. Society in the 16th century is a whole lot different than it was today, so there seems to be a little bit of debate about all that. So, but Sir John Hawkins is the one that's officially credited with introducing tobacco to England. But they returned back to England later in 1565. There we go. Now we gotta switch the notes again. Alrighty. In 1567, he set sail again and continued privateering and trading. And on September 23rd, 1568, he actually encountered a strong Spanish force, naval force, at San Juan de Ola. And forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, I'll put it down here. And maybe y'all can actually tell me the correct way to pronounce it. You know, I'm sorry, but my Spanish is horrible. You know, I try it, but I'm just not very good with it. So we'll say San Juan de Ola. What the Spanish ships were doing there is there was actually a rumor going around that there was about to be a uprising in New Spain. There was supposedly an independence movement brewing. So the Spanish had actually sent this fleet here to investigate the rumors and put down a rebellion if necessary. And Sir John Hawkins was just kind of in the wrong place at the wrong time whenever he decided they were going to, you know, raid this fort/settlement. But anyway, that ended up being the Battle of San Juan de Ulloa, and ended up being a major defeat for Sir John Hawkins. The Spanish ended up destroying all but 2 of his ships, and needless to say, they had a miserable ride back home to England. You know, it really did a number on them, and you know, it was a huge loss. But he finally made it back to England in 1569. Now, in 1570, the English government actually started a spying campaign against the Spanish. And under the orders from the Queen, Sir John Hawkins actually pretended to betray the crown in order to gain the confidence of the Spanish ambassadors, and ended up working kind of as like a double agent for the crown. And the information ended up foiling several plots against the English crown, and he ended up securing the release of several English POWs during his time as a spy. And in 1571, he was actually rewarded for his service to the crown and made the Treasurer of the Royal Navy. Now, as treasurer, he initiated a whole lot of different reforms to save money. There was a heavy focus on repairing old ships, getting them updated, modernized to the new standards, building new ships, making them quicker, faster, more maneuverable. Just, you know, really trying to get a top-of-the-line fleet so they could engage the Spanish and compete with them in the Atlantic and in the Caribbean. And a lot of his reforms and ideas weren't very popular amongst some of the people that had a vested interest in keeping the older ships the way they were, and, you know, not really doing what they needed to do to the new ships to, you know, get them up to par where they could compete with the Spanish ships. But anyway, his policies ended up prevailing, and he ended up doing quite a good job. Actually, let me switch my notes here and we'll get to that. Oh, here we go. Okay. In 1588, the ships, you know, ended up being tested against the Spanish Armada. Now, Hawkins served as Rear Admiral during this campaign, and he actually served alongside Francis Drake and Martin Frobisher. Forgive me if I'm saying that wrong, I'll put that down there too. But anyway, these were the 3 guys that were in charge of the fleet that went up against the Armada. But anyway, it was a fairly long campaign, but they ended up defeating the Armada in 1589. And Hawkins and Drake decided they were going to lead a major military campaign to intercept Spanish treasure ships sailing from the Americas and seize their cargo, their treasure, and whatever they had on them. And the reason they decided to do this then is because they had just destroyed the Armada that had been protecting the treasure ships coming back from the Americas. Anyway, long story short, this attempt ended up failing, and they were forced to return back to England. And since it failed, the Spanish were able to buy enough time to kind of rebuild their fleet and get it up and going again to where they could actually protect and escort the cargo and the treasure ships coming back from the Americas. But even though the campaign failed, it actually inspired other English privateers to take on, such raids, going and hitting the cargo ships and the Spanish ships. And some of them were pretty successful, but the majority of them, not so much. So, not very many people wanted to sail into a Spanish convoy and, really take on that many ships just to get a little bit of cargo or trailer. But there were some people that did it, and they got it, or, succeeded. Other peoples that tried it and didn't work so well. But, anyway, later on, in 1590, Hawkins and Drake, and it's important to mention, I believe Drake was actually his cousin. Sir Francis Drake was Sir John Hawkins' cousin. But anyway, Hawkins and Drake, they founded a charity to help sick and elderly mariners and sailors. And actually, this charity is actually still active to this day. But anyway, in 1592, they founded a hospital, and they founded a second hospital in 1594. But despite all that, in 1595, Hawkins and Drake both set sail again, and they ended up going out on a treasure hunting expedition to the West Indies. I'm guessing the plan is to hit, different Spanish ships, hit different villages and forts along the mainland, and just pretty much capture, whatever they could for the crown. Anyway, they ended up attacking San Juan in Puerto Rico twice. But they were unable to defeat the city's defenses. And not too long after that, both Hawkins and Drake both fell ill. And most folks believe that it was from dysentery. That seems to be the general consensus on, what made them sick. But unfortunately, both Sir John Hawkins and Sir Francis Drake would end up dying from their illness. And Sir John Hawkins died November 12th, 1595, and he was buried at sea off the coast of Puerto Rico. Drake would later die January 22nd, 1596, and he was buried at sea off the coast of Panama. But, yeah. Unfortunately, that's kind of a sad end for such a great sailor. Sorry about that, had to cut. I was getting off topic there. Anyway, but that's pretty much the story of Sir John Hawkins. He's definitely an interesting character. He done a lot of things during his lifetime. A lot of things that might not be, considered too good by today's standards. But, he did do a lot to further the use of tobacco throughout the world. And during this time, which he lived, there was a lot going on, and, it was really fascinating. But anyway, that's enough of that for now. I will have to say that next weekend, there won't be a History of Tobacco video out. I'll be out of town that weekend. I'll be busy most of the time this coming week between work and some other stuff I got going on. But yeah. Oh, and I will be out of town this coming weekend, so there won't be a History of Tobacco video out then. But I do have something else planned. But we'll take a little break from the History of Tobacco series and pick it up weekend after next. And I think that's all. Yeah. So, yeah, we'll just plan on doing that, and I'll let you guys know if anything changes. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get off here. Y'all enjoy the rest of your weekend. Enjoy a nice pipe, and we will talk to y'all later.